It's a big pleasure to welcome Dominic. Polyphagous shot-hole borer is a very serious disease and something that DPIRD is working heavily to try and control. It's something that the diagnostic group is doing a miraculous job trying to manage billions of samples. It's really important to get an update, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name's Dom. I recognize a lot of my DPIRD colleagues' faces in the room, so that's awesome. Nice to see you here. I'm the Public Information Officer or Public Information Manager for the Polyphagous shot-hole borer response for DPIRD. This first slide, I'm probably going to be the last time I actually say Polyphagous shot-hole borer. For the rest of the talk, I'll refer to it as PSHB. So if I start referring to things by their acronym, that's why. Otherwise, we'd be here for hours. So Polyphagous shot-hole borer, also known as Ululaceae fornicatus, what is it? Basically, it's a part of a group of beetles called ambrosia beetles. These are beetles that live in symbiosis with a fungal symbiont. So in this particular situation, PSHB has a fungal symbiont, which is a fusarium species. In Australia or in WA, it's fusarium species AF18, so a newly discovered fusarium species, which is exciting, I guess, depending on who you talk to. It basically excavates tunnels in trees. We call those tunnels galleries. It uses those tunnels to then plant that fungus and use the fungus as a food source. It's the fungal growth and the galleries within the tree that can cause tree death if left for too long. So one of the big issues with PSHB is they are only 2 millimeters in length, so they are really, really tiny. When you're actually looking at a tree, probably the last thing you'll see is the actual beetle. You're more likely to see the symptoms of the beetle before you see any beetles themselves. The female is slightly bigger, so it's about 2 millimeters, and the male's even smaller, about 1.6 mil in size. Okay, life cycle. We'll just very briefly run through life cycle. It's got what's called a haplodiploid mating system. That's just a fancy way of saying the female beetles can actually reproduce unmated, so they do not need a male to reproduce. All of those offspring will be male. She will then mate with those offspring and create more offspring who will be a mix of male and female. So she really doesn't need the males, but they're there. That's really all you can say about them. They're there. The females can also fly. They'll leave the tree and find another host tree, whereas the male will spend their entire lives within that same host tree. They've got a very short development time for a beetle, so about 22 days at 24 degrees, which really in Perth means it's going to be reproductive very quickly all year round, where you're unlikely to get a day that doesn't hit 24 degrees at some point. And they've got a fairly high reproductive rate, so 20 to 50 beetles per life cycle. Always get the first question is always, where did it come from? It's endemic to Southeast Asia, so through Taiwan, Thailand, even the north of Indonesia. There are several other large outbreaks around the world, the biggest two being Southern California and South Africa. Southern California detected PSHB in 2003. However, they misidentified it. They didn't correctly identify it until 2013, by which time it was way too late to do anything about it. So currently, they're in a process of management, but that management is basically including figuring out how far it's spread, delimiting, and trying to stop it spreading any further. So they're actually losing whole parks of 1,500 trees at a time, which are all dying. The other big one is South Africa. So they detected it in, what have I written there, 2017. Unfortunately for South Africa, they don't have a biosecurity hazard management agency. So there is no coordinated response to PSHB, and it's running riot over there. There are actually reports of seeing it marching down highways where one tree dies and then a couple of months later the next tree dies. And it's sort of this inexorable process of beetles hopping from tree to tree, devastating as they go. So in WA though, we detected it in August 2021. So we've just had our 2-year anniversary of PSHB being in Australia. This was the first detection in Australia. It's never been detected before. And as such, we've had to learn very quickly how to deal with this exotic pest. The detection was in 2 30-year-old box elder maples. Remember that name, box elder maple. I'm going to be saying it a lot more as we go through this short presentation. The resident of this home actually had, there was a storm and she had some branches fall from one of her trees. She looked at those branches and saw these weird black lines throughout the cross section, thought that looks really weird. She pulled out her trusty phone, used the My Pest Guide Reporter app, took a photo, sent it through to us, and our quarantine team figured out pretty quickly that we were dealing with an exotic pest. Okay, so we've got a pest, it's here. What are its impacts? Why do we care? I know I'm in a room full of people who care about biosecurity and all sorts of diseases, but it can be tricky when talking about PSHB to talk about why should we spend money on eradicating it. Basically, the biggest concern is our urban and amenity trees. That's our street trees, that's our gardens, that's our parks, that's even our native forests on the edges of our metro area, urban forests in general. Our biggest concern is around canopy loss. I think Perth has got the lowest canopy percentage of any capital city in Australia. We're desperately trying to grow more trees. And the risk is that PSHB is going to work actively against us in that. We've also got fruit and tree crops. This is potential risk. Data from the other countries where PSHB has shown some yield loss in their fruit and nut industries. Particularly for us, things like avos. We've got avocados growing in Gingin. Gingin's really not that far from the metro area. It could be devastating if it was to get out to those sorts of areas, let alone our larger agricultural areas. But the full impact will not be known for some time. We've only had it in Australia for 2 years, and we really still are learning a lot about it. I like to say here, hopefully we'll never know the full impact. We are trying to actively eradicate this pest, and hopefully that means we'll never know what damage it could do. So I'm going to talk quickly about some of the top hosts. It would be remiss of me not to not only educate you guys, but also try and activate you guys as potential surveillance people out there looking at your own trees, but also trees you come across every day. So the top hosts are, these are our top 6. We got the box elder maple, A. Sinagundo. This is the #1 host of PSHB worldwide. It loves this beyond anything else. It's like choosing the Lindt chocolate compared to the black and gold. It loves this more than anything. And we've had 466 detections on these. That's individual trees that have had positive detections of PSHB. The second host, now you're going to freak out because my numbers don't quite add up. The second host is the black locust, or Robinia pseudoacacia, with 515 positive detections. Yes, that is more than 466. However, we have way more Robinias in Perth than we do box elder maples. Box elder maples are a fairly exotic tree in Perth. We don't have a lot of them, whereas Robinias are really a weed, and we should be cutting them down anyway, in my opinion. But when they are planted along our streets and in our parks, they will pop up everywhere. So We have got more detections in Robinias, but percentage-wise, it's less than the box elder maple, but it is still an issue. The third one I've got up here is the coral tree or the erythrinas. I've sort of grouped all of the erythrina species together because they're fairly difficult to tell apart. This is one of our most common street trees that we plant in WA, and we've had 382 positive detections on these. So that number is getting up there. It's not at the same level as the Aesynagundo or the Robinia, but it's getting high. And because there are so many planted, it is a risk, a high risk host for Perth. Plane trees. So we see a massive drop between those top three and then number four being the plane tree, 99 detections. Obviously a big risk for us in terms of our streets and parks. A big one would be, say, Hyde Park, where we've got about 60 plane trees alone, and they're a massive part of that ecosystem, but also the natural look of the park. So it's a massive risk for us around those. Moreton Bay figs, 74 detections. So again, we're dropping massively down from those top three, way down below 100 detections. However, all 74 of these Moreton Bay figs are probably more important culturally than all of those other trees combined. Every one of those Moreton Bay figs was generally planted about 80 to 100 years ago. So they're all enormous and they all are really important. So we're talking about the really big figs at Kings Park. We're talking about the really big figs all through the city of Perth, South Perth along Mill Point Road, Rottnest Island, for example, as well. So there are risks not just around our native environment, but also cultural heritage is really worrying as well. And then the last one, just so I've got an even number of trees up on this slide, is the Poinciana, Dilonyx regia, 58 positive detections. This is just to go to show this is our 6th highest detections, and it's 58, so it's tiny compared to those top ones. So the really important thing to look out for is those top 2 or 3 hosts. Here's another example. Why should we care? So this is a street that has 16 box elder maples on in the northern suburbs. We checked these trees every 3 months for about 18 months, and then we detected PSHB on that street. And this is what the street looks like now. You can see absolutely massive shift, not just in terms of the obvious one is the look of the street, but now we're talking about increases in temperature. There's now been a decrease in property prices if you're more financially motivated. This was the only tree that most of these houses actually had anywhere near them. They've got no gardens. We're talking northern suburbs, no gardens, lots of concrete. And so the only tree these people had any contact with on a day-to-day basis was that one outside their house. And now it's gone because of PSHB. The host that we're really worried about. So in WA, we've detected PSHB in 130 different host species of trees. So I've shown you 6, but we've got 130 different trees that we're concerned about and we've had detections on. Globally, there are over 500 hosts that have been infested with PSHB. It's a massive list. I don't know if any of you have a good grasp of Latin or Greek, but Polyphagous, meaning many eating. So what it really means is it will eat anything. It will try to go for any tree it can. So we've got 50% of these, 130 have been proven to be reproductive. So these are the ones we're really concerned about. This is where the borer has actually dug in and been able to complete a life cycle. A lot of times it will just bore into the tree, have a taste for it and decide, no, it's not for me. We'll leave and find another tree. But 50% of the time they'll actually get in there, plant their fungus, have a whole life cycle, and that's where the concerns really start to arise. And in WA, we've detected it in 58 new hosts. So our host list is shared globally across the world to help other countries combat PSHB. And because of the combination of our slightly different climate, our slightly different host range, we've detected it in 58 new species. A lot of those species are the ones that you guys would be mostly worried about, which is our endemic WA natives. Speaking of WA natives, here's the detections we've had on WA natives are fairly, well, Australian natives in general, is fairly extensive. So there's a lot of trees up on this list. The thing to remember, and the thing I really want to try and point out to you guys, is the detections have been mostly single trees or 2 to 3 trees. So a lot of different species, but only a few individuals of those species. So I think there's 5 different species of eucalypt on this list, multiple different species of acacia, multiple different casuarinas. All of these are a risk, but there's really 3 factors that increase the chances of these getting attacked. The biggest factor is one of those other top 6 hosts close by that is heavily infested. That's the biggest risk to our native hosts. So if there's a box elder maple heavily infested right next to a whole bunch of natives, those natives are more likely to be infested. Second thing is where the tree is planted. So a lot of rubbish dumps have been covered in soil, and we planted trees there as some sort of, to try and rehabilitate the site. Those trees will never be as healthy as a tree grown in the correct soil, the correct land, and therefore the risk of them being infested is higher, not just for PSHB, but for all sorts of other diseases and pathogens. Speaking of pathogens, the third risk factor is really if it's been infested with something else. So if you go into, say, a dieback hotspot, I'll use Kings Park, for example. We know we've got dieback at Kings Park. We've got a native, this Marrie is actually at Kings Park, this photo. This was infested because, one, it was already really sick. So there was estimated 70% dieback on this tree before it was infested. And it was in really close proximity to a heavily infested erythrina. So you've got 2 risk factors that have caused this tree to become infested compared to the other trees around it. So I know the list is pretty big. Don't worry too much. The risk is there, but we were going to try and keep it out of our native bushland. What is DPIRD doing? I'd be a bad state government employee if I didn't try and talk up what we're doing. So we're working within a national framework. This is the first time it was detected in Australia. First thing we then did was tell the national committee about the detection. And then we formed the national management group who put together a national management framework. So we're working under an eradication plan. The other states and industries went, no, we don't want that. Thank you. Get rid of it. So we're getting rid of it. We've got a quarantine area movement restrictions. They're fairly extensive. I've got some flyers and things outside. So on the lunch break, highly recommend coming and grabbing some from me. Basically, we don't want to move plants or wood from inside the quarantine area to outside the quarantine area. As you can see by that map, it's a pretty extensive quarantine area. We've also got trapping all across the metro area and a bit of a regional trapping grid as well. Surveillance and inspections, this is the biggest thing that we're doing a lot of. Our team's out there every day inspecting trees, all along streets, parks, people's backyards, you name it, we inspect it. Management of those infested trees, working with the green waste facilities, and then communication. We've spoken a lot about comms today. Comms is the most important thing in my opinion. Get the word out there. Do some quick stats and then we'll get through to the end. So our quarantine area is 871 square kilometres, 25 different local government areas that I contact almost daily. Over 700 individual infested premises across that quarantine area, 136,000 inspections, nearly 1.5 million host trees. So when you come and look at my pieces of wood outside, you'll see just how hard it is to do surveillance on those trees. And then I like to show off the distance travelled. Over 700,000 kilometres our response has travelled in the last 2 years, which is just massive. There's some requirements. It's better for you guys to come and talk to me about those if you're worried. Treatment options. Is there any way we can inject or spray any chemicals? No. The only management for PSHB is actually the removal or the pruning of infested trees. The good news is if we can chip that material to less than 2.5 centimeters, we've got a 99.999% kill rate, which is fantastic. However, unfortunately, there's no chemical treatment. And the reason why there's no chemical treatment is they don't actually consume the wood as a food source, they consume the fungus. The other issue is the fungus blocks the vascular flow of nutrients and water through the tree, which makes it almost impossible to get that chemical to the beetles and to the fungus itself. And then those injection sites, we're talking about trees that are in distress, the injection sites then become potential entrance points for other pathogens. However, there's a face that many of you in this room should recognize. We are doing some trials, chemical trials. That's Bill Dunstan. We have got an emergency permit to trial injections of emamectin benzoate. Unfortunately, as I just mentioned, the injections into a tree don't seem to work because you can't get the chemical to the beetles. So in this photo, Bill is actually injecting micropipetting individual doses of emamectin benzoate into individual shot holes. So you can imagine that that is simply not a viable option for chemical treatment. Is it working? We'll run into the question time a little bit, I think. Is it working? Really hard. There's a lot of challenges with this beetle, but we had a really important, heavily infested site early on called Mason Gardens, huge site in Dalkeith, 150 odd box elder maples. You can see the numbers of beetles on our traps was way above 50. We did our first treatment beginning of 2022. Saw those trap numbers plummet to almost 0. We then did another treatment to try and mop up some leftover beetles. Then we started to see a bit of a climb up again as we got into spring, summer 2022. And then we did another treatment earlier this year and those numbers have dropped off again. So it seems that the work that we are doing is having an impact, which is fantastic. What can you guys do? Important thing is to educate yourselves and report the locations of those top trees. So if you see a box elder maple, you see a robinia, they're looking sick, report them into us using the My Pest Guide Reporter app. Here are some of the symptoms, the really important ones, because I'd be remiss not to try and get you guys to do some work for me. Look out for the shot holes. They're about 1 millimeter in diameter, perfectly round. These galleries on the cutouts, these are those tunnels where the fungus is growing. Frass or wood noodles, this is a sign that you've got active infestation. That's beetles pushing out the sawdust behind them as they bore in. Dieback, the difference between this dieback and Phytophthora dieback is it's generally going to be a single branch where the beetles are as opposed to the whole crown. So that's what you need to look for, an individual branch starting to die before the rest of the tree. And then gumming and lesions and stainings, these are caused by all sorts of things. It's just a sign for us to then go and have a closer look. Is there a hole behind that? We've got our website, lots of information on there, including a what to plant guide, help you guys planting new plantings. I really recommend, Kylie stole this slide from me, so that's not fair. Report everything through the My Pest Guide app. And then I was asked very kindly if I could just leave one slide up about this. DPIRD and the My Pest Guide team are running the biosecurity blitz this year. Some of you may be aware of it. We do it every year. This year it's around backyard biosecurity. If you're interested in getting out there and getting your friends and family to inspect and report pests and diseases, jump on the Biosecurity Blitz website and register and help us out with some community science. And if you want, I've got a QR code. You can scan this QR code and it will take you to our website. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic, for a very comprehensive and exciting and interesting presentation. We've got 3 minutes. Questions. This is a great opportunity to engage.
And I will be outside standing at my table during the lunch break if you have more in-depth questions.
3 questions.
Have you gone beyond containment? And is it too big now an issue, do you think?
I'm pretty confident that we can still eradicate. So we're not even at containment, we've delimited, and now we're moving to eradicate. So we're only really a year into our national response. So this coming spring and summer is going to be really important and really telling on whether or not the beetle numbers have gone down. The other countries all laughed at us when we said we were going to eradicate, but we've caught this pest way earlier than anyone else has ever found it. So I'm still confident in eradication.
How many more resources were put towards it when it was found?
The federal government basically pledged $40 million to the eradication of this pest. So huge amount of resources, which is great.
Another question on the back.
1 second.
Thanks. The street tree prunings. So in the quarantine area, is there an embargo on making that available to residents or, you know, tree loppers? What's the management there?
So what we've really tried to do is work with all of the LGAs impacted by the quarantine area to, if they are doing street tree pruning, those street trees, all that material is chipped and taken to an approved facility, or it's taken to a specific site that we can then monitor. We didn't want to stop any normal practice from occurring. We just want to try and manage those normal practices. So if we do find PSHB in a street tree, we then will put a stop on any works happening until we've confirmed that it's gone.
So for local government that aren't as yet infected, that should be best management practice when they make that mulch available.
Yep.
So less than 2.5 centimetre chips. And does it need to be composted? Is that part of the management?
Management of known infested material, we do compost. However, non-infested material, we're pretty confident that the chipping itself will kill 99.9% of the beetles. So the risk is really low.
Thanks.
No
Got 2 questions up here and then we better move on.
Just a short one. Does any part of the life cycle occur in dead wood?
No. So I skipped through it quickly because it's obviously a very complex subject that I'm trying to get through in a quick amount of time. The fungus needs that living material and the vascular flow through the tree to live and to grow. The beetle needs the fungus to live. So what you do find is if there's a large log that is really moist sitting in a wet area, there is a potential for fungal growth and therefore potential for PSHB, but risk is very, very low. The beetles will use dead wood as a way to get into a tree, but they'll only really grow their fungus and live in the living material.
What symptoms do you see in concrete stuff?
Shot holes. So shot holes are the major symptom. All other symptoms are really secondary to shot holes. So those holes are the one that we really are looking for. You will probably see frass and you'll probably see shot holes in a non-reproductive host, but what you won't see is the galleries, because those galleries are the fungus growth and where the beetle is reproducing. So that would be the one symptom you wouldn't see.
Thank you
Awesome.
very much. That's excellent.